So we've learned some basics about HTML, we've added some tags, we've formatted some text. Now let's talk about CSS. In this video, we'll get introduced to it, and at the end of the video, we'll apply some CSS code to our file from last time, the webpage 02 file, where you already had some text and some code set up in HTML. So what is CSS? Well, Cascading Style Sheet is what that stands for. That's what the CSS is. What does that mean? Well, the style sheet part, let's look at that first. So CSS affects the style or the look of the text and the other elements on the page. A style sheet, and remember, MLA, APA, remember those guides that you use when you're formatting citations? That's also a style sheet, right? It's a set of guidelines for consistently formatting elements, right? So when you're using something like MLA, it's a way of consistently formatting how your paper looks. It has a certain heading that has to look a certain way. The title looks a certain way. And those citations have that hanging indent and italicized book titles and commas between certain elements and periods between others, right? So just like that kind of style sheet, CSS is also a style sheet, except instead of something that humans use to format the look of a document that they're writing, it's something that the computer uses to format the look of text on a web page. So CSS can be used for elements throughout the page or even throughout an entire site. And that's where the cascading part comes in. And the cascading is really important. What that means is that by creating a centralized style definition, you can affect all instances of an element within a defined scope where the style sheet is applied. Okay, so we're going to start by just applying a style within our page, but eventually we're going to create standalone CSS files that can apply through an entire website just using one line of code to make that apply. Okay, I'm using the same page that we started last time, webpage 02. I've renamed it webpage 03, and I already have my heading 1, heading 2, my paragraphs, so that's good because in order to use CSS, it applies to existing HTML tags. We can also create custom classes, but that's going to be down the road a little bit. We're going to work with a page that already has some tags, and then we're going to apply the CSS to it. Now, remember a couple of videos ago, I talked about how the head is a useful area, and you're going to find that it is a useful area. Well, this is that time. Let's go ahead and give ourselves some space up in the head of the page. We're going to put in a new tag. This tag is called style, and it's one that gets a beginning and an end. So we're just basically opening up a little bit of space for ourselves. So that style area basically tells the web browser, all right, I'm switching to a new language. I'm switching to CSS now. Okay, so that's what the style tag announces to the browser, and it creates a little space for us to start writing in different language, in this case CSS, another tag language that we're going to be using. Okay, so let's go ahead. Now, here's how the convention works. Basically what we do in CSS is we identify the HTML tag that we want to apply styling to. In this case, I want to apply stuff to the entire body of our text. Okay, and I'm going to open up some curly brackets because, as you recall, CSS is all about the curly brackets. And all that's going to say is everything between this open curly and end curly is going to apply to the body of the page. I am going to, I'm just using some spaces to indent just for my own sake, so it's easier to read. You don't have to do that. It's not meaningful in any way to the browser, but just for the purposes of making it a little visually easier to read. So I'm going to change the font family. So in other words, the style of font that we're using. I want to change it to a sans serif font because sans serif fonts are easier to read on the page, right? Our Times New Roman, which is what the default is perfectly fine for printed documents. But honestly, I find the sans serif a lot easier to read when we're talking about web pages. And what I'm basically doing here is I'm giving the browser two different options. I'm saying I'd like you to use Verdana. If Verdana is not available, just use whatever the default sans serif font is. So let's just start with that simple change. And then we're going to go ahead and reload that, and you can see what happens. Everything on the page changes to this new font, and that's because we applied that CSS styling to the body. Everything, what that means is everything from here to here is going to get that formatting, right? That's what happens when you apply something in the body. Okay, so now what about our H1? Let's say we'd like to change the color of that heading 1. Let's go ahead and do that. So you'll see in the resources for this module a link to an HTML color picker, and there's a bunch online. I'm just using this simple one that comes up with Google. And notice you can kind of move it around in different ways to get whatever tone you like along the color scheme, right? And what it's showing here on the left is the color. I kind of like that winey purpley color. And then what you want to grab is the one that's labeled hex. And there's another video on color in HTML, and that will explain what that is all about. But that's the value you want to grab for your code. So we're going to go ahead and put that in here. You do need that hashtag in front of it. And like always, we want to put our semicolon behind it. And we're going to make our H1s that wine color. Now, remember, because this is cascading, I only need to tell it H1 what the color is, and it should apply to every single H1 on the page. And sure enough, it does. Okay. And that color isn't super different than black. So we'll get, for our H2, we'll get a more boldly different color here. Let's do this kind of tealy color. And I'm just going to grab, again, just grabbing that value. And by now, hopefully you should be predicting how this is going to work. Okay, save that and reload over here. And there you go. So now we've got these kind of wine color heading 1 and the blue heading 2. And that gives us a sense of how the CSS is applied on the page. So here's my challenge to you. Go ahead and set a background color for the page, and you can use the tutorial to look up how to do that, and apply some kind of styling to the paragraphs on your page.